Chronicles of the White Valley, Part 4, The Whisper of a New Dawn. This is a Moon Dragon original production. All rights are reserved. The peace that settled over the valley after Maka's defiant stand was not the loud, celebratory kind. It was a quiet thing, fragile as a morning cobweb beaded with dew, yet possessing a strength that belied its delicacy. It was a peace woven from shared relief, from a collective decision to believe in the fragile bridge that Anya and Maka's love had built between their two worlds. For Henry Cooper, watching from the porch of the cabin he had once hoped to share with his late wife Sarah, it felt like the first true breath after a long dive into icy water. The air itself seemed cleaner, scented with pine and the rich, dark earth of the gardens they had planted, now bursting with the green promise of summer. The sounds were different too. The constant, low-grade hum of tension was gone, replaced by the clear ring of Thomas Rivers's hammer on the new schoolhouse roof and the distant, happy shouts of children at play. He allowed himself, for the first time in years, to feel not just the absence of pain, but the faint, tentative stirrings of something like contentment. For Anya Petrova, the world had been remade in a single, stunning act of courage. Her walks with Maka were no longer stolen, secret things, fraught with the fear of discovery. They were public, solemn declarations. They walked hand in hand along the riverbank in the evenings, and the valley watched them pass, the settlers with a kind of awed curiosity, the Apsaluk with a quiet, accepting respect. Their love was no longer a personal secret. It had become a foundational stone of their new, shared reality. Anya's heart, once a hollowed-out vessel of grief after losing her daughter Kasia, now felt so full it threatened to overflow. She found herself smiling for no reason, her hand often straying to the simple leather thong around her neck from which hung a small, beautifully carved bear charm, Maka's first gift to her, a symbol of protection and strength. It was on one such golden morning, with the sun filtering through the tall pines in shafts of light that looked almost holy, that Elinor Vance found herself walking beside her friend. Anya's woven basket was hooked over her arm, already half full with the morning's harvest. Sprigs of fuzzy lamb's ear for poultices, deep green yarrow clusters for staunching blood, and the delicate, white-flowered valerian root that promised restful sleep. "I am going to the village of the Apsaluk today," Anya said, her voice as soft and calm as the breeze that rustled the leaves above them. She used their true name, children of the large-beaked bird, a sign of the deep respect Grimrook had finally bestowed upon them. An elder, a woman named Cox, has hands that are twisted with pain. It keeps her from her beadwork. Maka says she is a great storyteller, that her words hold the history of her people. Her silence is a loss to everyone. Elinor, ever the chronicler, felt a familiar, thrilling pull in her chest, the insatiable hunger of a curious mind presented with a new, uncharted chapter. The journal she carried everywhere, its rawhide cover softened from use, was a testament to that hunger. Its pages held the epic, tragic saga of their exodus, the names and dates of their dead, the meticulous records of planting and harvest. But the inner life of the Apsaluk village remained a profound mystery, a book written in a language she could not decipher, and she ached to understand it. "Might I," she began, her voice uncharacteristically tentative. "Would it be an imposition if I accompanied you? I would not interfere with your work. I only wish to," she trailed off, searching for a word that didn't sound so clinical. Observe, study. They felt like violations. Anya turned her gentle gaze on her friend, a knowing smile touching her lips. She saw the keen intelligence in Elinor's eyes, the same drive that had made her a teacher, and understood it was not mere curiosity, but a deep-seated need to connect, to understand, to preserve. "I think it would be a kindness," Anya said. Cox's voice may be stilled, but her eyes still see. Perhaps the presence of a new listener, a keeper of stories herself, would be a powerful medicine too. The path to the Apsaluk camp was unlike any trail Elinor had known. It was not carved by wagon wheels or even by the repeated tread of heavy boots. It was a subtle thing, a whisper through the landscape. It followed the logic of the land itself, a dip behind a granite outcrop here, a crossing at a specific stony shallow in the river there, a way marked by a subtly bent branch or alignment with a distant, singular pine tree on a ridge. It was a path known by heart, not by sight. As they crossed the river, the water icy and swift around their ankles, Elinor felt a shift. It was as if they had passed through an invisible veil. The air on the other side carried new scents, the rich, smoky smell of tanned hides, the sharp, clean aroma of sweetgrass, the pungent tang of herbs she couldn't name. It was the smell of a life lived not just on the land, but with it, intimately and inseparably. The village was a revelation. It was not a static collection of buildings, but a living, breathing organism that seemed to have grown naturally from the forest floor. The ache, buffalo hide tipis, were arranged in a wide circle, their smoke flaps open to the sky. Each was a masterpiece of art and identity, painted with brilliant ochre, red and black pigments in swirling geometric patterns and powerful symbols. Galloping horses, soaring eagles, victorious battles, and sacred dreams. Children with dark, inquisitive eyes and easy laughter paused in their games of stick and hoop to watch the two women approach. Their gazes were not fearful, but openly curious, assessing. The sense of community was a tangible force, a warm, humming energy that enveloped her. And it was there, standing near the center of this vibrant circle of life, that Alinar first saw Iruha in his element. He was not the stern, imposing chief who had faced down Caleb Hodge's rifle, his expression carved from granite. Here, he was simply a man, a father, a teacher. He was crouched on his heels, surrounded by 3 young boys who watched his every move with rapt attention. In his capable hands was a half-strung bow, and he was demonstrating the art of aligning the string, his movements economical, fluid, and sure. The morning sun caught the strands of silver woven through the long, dark hair that fell loose around his shoulders. And for a moment, he looked younger, the weight of leadership momentarily lifted. He glanced up as they approached, and his dark, perceptive eyes that usually seemed to see everything, from the mood of his people to the weather signs on the horizon, softened almost imperceptibly when they fell upon Anya. She was family now. A thread woven into the fabric of his extended kin. Then his gaze shifted, and it landed on Alinar. It was not the assessing look of a leader evaluating a potential threat. It was not the casual, fleeting glance one gives a stranger. It was a moment of pure, unguarded attention. He saw a woman who carried herself with an innate, unassuming grace. He saw intelligent, watchful eyes the color of a summer sky after a rain, eyes that missed no detail, that seemed to absorb the world around her. He saw hands that, though stained with ink from her constant writing, were slender and looked both delicate and capable. She was unlike any settler woman he had encountered. She did not look upon his village with the fear she had shown at the tense feast, or with dismissive superiority, but with a profound, respectful, and utterly captivating curiosity. "Anya," he said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that seemed to vibrate in the quiet space between them. He offered a slight, respectful nod of welcome. "Iruha," Anya replied, dipping her head in return. "This is my friend Alinar Vance. She has come with me to visit Cox." Iruha's eyes remained on Alinar for a heartbeat longer than courtesy strictly demanded. In that space of a single breath, something silent and significant passed between them, a spark of mutual recognition, a flicker of intense curiosity. "Cox will be grateful," he said, his English careful and formal, learned from years of trading at forts and honed in recent months through his dealings with Rook and Maka. "Her stories are like birds with injured wings. They wish to fly but cannot. A new listener," he paused, searching for the right word, his dark eyes holding hers. "A new listener may help them remember the sky." Alinar found her voice, though it felt smaller, more breathless than usual under the intensity of his gaze. "It is an honor to be welcomed into your home," she said, the words feeling inadequate but sincere. He gave a single, slow nod, a gesture that was both a gracious acknowledgement and a polite dismissal, as he turned his attention back to the boys and their bow. But the air between them had been irrevocably altered. A thread, fine as the first silk of a spider's web and just as strong, had been spun, connecting them across the vast and complicated space that separated their worlds. The inside of Cox's tipi was a world unto itself. It was warm and glowed with the soft, diffused light from the smoke hole and the hide walls. The air was fragrant with the scent of dried sage, smoked leather, and the slow-burning fire of cottonwood root. The old woman herself was seated on a pile of soft furs, her back straight despite her years. Her face was a beautiful, intricate map of a long life lived, her eyes milky with cataracts but still possessing a sharp, undimmed intelligence. Her hands, resting in her lap, were indeed twisted and swollen. The fingers curled in on themselves like ancient roots. Anya went to work without ceremony, her healer's instinct taking over. She knelt before Cox, speaking in a soft, soothing tone, a mixture of her few words of Crow, the universal language of a gentle touch, and the simple English she knew the old woman understood a little. She unpacked her basket, mixing a poultice of warmed buffalo fat and infused willow bark in a small clay pot, her movements sure and reverent. Elinor sat quietly on a folded robe nearby, her journal forgotten in her lap. She was captivated by the scene, the trust that passed between the two women, the deep, quiet dignity of Coxa, the focused compassion of Anya. She listened to the soft, rhythmic cadence of their interaction, a language that transcended words. After a time, as the poultice was applied and the tight lines of pain around Coxa's eyes began to ease, the old woman let out a long, slow sigh. She turned her sightless gaze towards where Elinor sat. She began to speak, her voice a dry rustle, like leaves in the wind. She pointed a trembling, gnarled finger towards a specific symbol on the inside of the tippy wall, a series of horizontal lines topped with stark, black triangles. "Isa Kawueti," she whispered, the word full of ancient resonance. Maka, who had entered as silently as a shadow to check on them, translated from where he stood by the entrance. "She says, the one who dreams the mountains. It is the story of how the Absaroka Mountains were formed. It is a story of a great giant, a spirit of the earth, who fell in love with the sky." And so, through Maka's halting but earnest translation, Cox began to weave her tale. It was a story of impossible longing, of a love so vast and profound it could sculpt the very bones of the earth. It spoke of the giant's tears becoming the rivers, his sighs the wind that swept through the passes, and his final, eternal rest becoming the majestic, soaring peaks that now protected their valley. It was a creation myth, yes, but it was also a heartbreakingly beautiful love story. Elinor was utterly mesmerized. It was as epic and moving as any tale from the leather-bound volumes of poetry she had carried across a continent, but this was not ink on paper. This was a living breath, born from the very soil beneath her feet, a story the mountains themselves seemed to whisper. She did not reach for her journal. She simply let the words wash over her, allowing the images to paint themselves directly onto her soul. When the story was finished, a deep, sacred silence filled the tipi. Cox's head was bowed, a single tear tracing a path through the wrinkles on her cheek. The telling had cost her energy, but it had also clearly set something free within her spirit. The walk back to the settlement was a quiet one. Elinor moved as if in a dream, her mind replaying the story, the smells of the tipi, the feel of the hide beneath her hands, the profound depth in Cox's sightless eyes. "You are very quiet," Anya observed gently, her own spirit seeming calm and settled after the act of healing. "Her story," Elinor began, her voice full of a wonder she couldn't conceal. "It was about love, but not a simple romance. It was about a love that was creative, a love that built something lasting and beautiful out of its own yearning. It was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard." Anya smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "They have many such stories. Their world is not just a place they live. It is a living relative. The river speaks. The mountain dreams. The rock remembers. It is a different way of being, a different way of seeing." Elinor thought of Ituha, standing so solid and central in the middle of that world. She thought of the weight he carried, the deep, still pools of his eyes that seemed to hold an understanding of those very conversations with the earth and sky. He was no longer just a political entity, a chief to be negotiated with. He was a man who belonged to a story, and the story, in all its beauty and sorrow, belonged to him. The following week, a gift was left on the rough-hewn steps of the half-built schoolhouse. It was not something loud or obvious. It was a single, perfect primary feather from a golden eagle, its veins stark white and dark brown. It was tied with a delicate, braided strip of soft, tan leather to a smooth, heavy river stone the color of slate, a practical measure to keep the wind from stealing it away. There was no note. No explanation was needed. Elinor discovered it at first light. She knelt, her breath catching in her throat, and picked it up with a reverence usually reserved for holy objects. She knew what it meant. An eagle feather was not given lightly. It was a symbol of honor, of courage, of a connection to the divine. It was one of the highest compliments a crow man could bestow. She knew who it was from. Her fingers traced the soft, impossibly light veins of the feather, then the cool, solid weight of the stone. She looked up, her gaze instinctively drawn across the river, towards the Apsaluk camp, now hidden by the trees. Her heart began to beat a strange, unfamiliar rhythm against her ribs, a rhythm of nervousness, of honor, and of a dawning, terrifying hope. Across the distance, unseen, Iruha watched from the edge of the tree line. He saw her find his offering. He saw the way she held it, not as a mere curiosity or a trophy, but with a deep, genuine reverence. He saw the faint, wondering smile that touched her lips before she turned and carried it carefully inside, holding it close to her heart as something precious. In his own chest, he felt a stirring he had not allowed himself to feel since the death of his wife, Iskwi, many winters before the settlers had ever come. It was more than political interest in an ally. It was a profound, personal curiosity about the woman with the sky-colored eyes and the quiet strength. He saw in her a spirit that mirrored his own, thoughtful, observant, burdened with responsibility, yet capable of appreciating profound beauty. He saw a grace that appealed to him deeply. It was just a feather. It was just a look across a distance. It was just a single, silent moment of connection. But in the way of all great love stories, the kind that are written in the quiet moments and the unspoken understandings, in the way that Nicholas Sparks so beautifully captures, it was a beginning. A tentative, fragile, and utterly breathtaking beginning of something neither of them had ever dared to expect. A new whisper of dawn in the valley of their hearts. Of course, let us continue this beautiful, heartfelt journey, tracing the delicate and powerful love story between Elinor Vance and Iruha, a tale of two worlds merging into one, written with the emotional depth and sweeping romance it deserves. Chapter VII, The Language of the Heart. The eagle feather, tied to its river stone anchor, found a place of honor on the rough-hewn mantel above the fireplace in Elinor's small cabin. It was a constant, silent presence, a daily reminder of the look in Iruha's dark eyes and the profound, unspoken promise it represented. Each morning, her gaze would drift to it, and a flutter of something warm and terrifyingly wonderful would stir in her chest. The valley, meanwhile, held its breath. The fragile peace was tested not by conflict, but by a creeping, unseen malaise. It began with the livestock. One of the milk goats grew listless, refusing its feed. Then a settler's prized chicken was found dead in its coop, no mark upon it. A deep, hacking cough spread among the children of both communities, a cough that lingered in the chest and stole sleep. Whispers started, faint at first, then gaining strength like a gathering storm. Among the settlers, those still clinging to the old ways murmured of a biblical curse, a divine punishment for the unorthodox unions forming between their people and the savages. Among the Apsaluk, older members, wary of this new alliance, spoke of a Bakspay, a bad spirit, brought by the newcomers, a disruption of the natural balance. The air, once sweet with hope, grew thick with superstition and fear. The shared feasts stopped. The children were kept closer to their own camps. The invisible line along the river seemed to darken and deepen once more. It was in this atmosphere of renewed tension that Elinor found her purpose. She saw the fear in the eyes of the settler children, heard the cough that racked their small bodies. She saw the same worry mirrored in the faces of the Apsaluk mothers. The schoolhouse, her dream, stood half-finished, a symbol of a future that now seemed uncertain. She could not build walls, but she could build bridges. With Anya's blessing and a basket of honeyed tea and yarrow, she began to visit the sick children, both in the settler cabins and, with a heart pounding with trepidation, in the Apsaluk camp. She did not go as a healer, that was Anya's domain, but as a comforter. She brought her books, the ones with beautiful illustrations of animals and far-off lands. She would sit by a child's sleeping mat and read softly, her calm, steady voice a balm against the fear in the room. It was on her third visit to the village that she saw him again. She was reading to a little girl with bright, fever-bright eyes, the child's mother watching anxiously from nearby. Elinor's voice was soft, weaving the tale of a brave mouse on a great adventure. She didn't hear him approach, but she felt his presence, a shift in the air, a quieting of the world around her. She looked up. Iruha stood at the entrance of the tipi, his broad shoulders filling the space. He was not wearing his chief's regalia, but simple hunting leathers. His expression was grave, etched with the worry of a leader watching his people suffer. But when his eyes met hers, the gravity softened into something else, a deep, unwavering appreciation. He did not speak. He simply watched her, listened to her gentle voice calming the child, saw the way the mother's tense shoulders had relaxed slightly. He saw not a settler woman, but a woman of profound kindness, using her gifts to mend what was breaking. When the child finally drifted into a fitful sleep, Elinor quietly closed the book. She rose and stepped outside into the afternoon light, Iruha following her. "The cough," he said, his voice low. "It is in your people also." "Yes," Elinor replied, her voice soft with concern. "It is in every home. Anya is working day and night with her medicines. Our healer, Bakat, uses the steam of the Iachielia plant," Iruha said. "It helps to break the fever and clear the breath." It was an offering, a sharing of knowledge. "I will tell her," Elinor said, her heart lifting at this small, crucial collaboration. "Thank you, Iruha." He nodded, his gaze intense. He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to read the story written in her soul. "You are not afraid to be here." He stated, it wasn't a question. Elinor met his gaze, her own resolve firming. "The children are afraid. Their mothers are afraid. Fear is the real sickness. My words, my stories, they are the only medicine I have to fight it." If you're enjoying the story thus far, consider liking the video and letting us know where you're listening from. Your support means the world to us. A look of profound respect dawned in his eyes. He saw her courage, not the courage of a warrior with a weapon, but the deeper, quieter courage of the heart. "Your medicine is strong," he said quietly. Then, after a pause, he added, "The story you told, of the small mouse, it is a good story." He had been listening. The thought sent a thrill through her. "It is about courage," she said, "about being brave even when you are small." "Courage has many faces," he replied, his eyes holding hers. "So does strength." It was the longest conversation they had ever had. It was about sickness and fear, but it felt like the first real, honest words between them, stripped of their roles as chief and teacher, speaking simply as a man and a woman concerned for their people. The collaboration between Anya and Bakat became the turning point. The settler healer and the Apsaluk medicine man, once wary of each other, began to share knowledge. Anya's honey poultices and willow bark tea were combined with Bakat's medicinal steams and sweat lodge ceremonies. It was a fusion of science and spirit, and slowly, steadily, it began to work. The cough loosened its grip. The fevers broke. The malaise lifted. The crisis had been met not with division, but with unity. And at the center of that unity was the quiet, steady presence of Elinor Vance, who had fought the fear with the only weapon she possessed, a story. A few days after the sickness had passed, a second gift appeared on her doorstep. This time, it was a beautifully tanned deerskin, softer than any velvet she had ever felt. Folded within it was a small, exquisitely carved wooden horse, its mane flowing, its spirit captured in the delicate whorls of the wood. There was no note. None was needed. Tears welled in Elinor's eyes as she picked up the carving. The horse was a symbol of freedom, of power, of travel to new horizons. It felt like a message, an acknowledgement of her journey, of the courage she had shown. She held the little horse in her palm, its smooth wood warm against her skin, and she knew, with a certainty that shook her to her core, that she was falling in love with him. The following week, she knew she had to respond. Not with words, which were still a barrier, but with action, with her own language. She spent days preparing. She consulted with Anya and Maka on the proper protocols, on what would be considered respectful. Then, one evening, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of violet and gold, she walked to the riverbank, the place that marked the boundary between their worlds. She carried with her a book. It was not one of her teaching books, but her most precious possession, a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets, its cover worn soft, its pages filled with her father's marginalia. It held the essence of who she was, of the world she came from. Iruha was there. He often came to the river at dusk to think, to watch the water flow. He saw her approaching and stood still, waiting. Elinar's heart hammered against her ribs, but her steps did not falter. She stopped before him, the book held in both hands like an offering. She did not try to speak. She simply opened it to a specific sonnet, one her father had loved, and pointed to the lines. She began to read aloud, her voice clear and steady, though it trembled slightly with emotion. She read the words written centuries ago and an ocean away, words of love and constancy, of beauty that outlasts the summer's rose. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. He could not understand the words. The intricate Elizabethan poetry was a foreign country to him, but he understood the language in which she spoke them. He heard the emotion in her voice, saw the sincerity in her eyes, the way she held the book as something sacred. She was sharing her heart with him, the deepest part of her culture, just as Coxa had shared the story of the mountains. When she finished, the last words hanging in the still evening air, she closed the book and held it out to him. Iruha looked from the book to her face, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he reached out and took it. His fingers brushed against hers, and a jolt, like a spark from a flint, passed between them. He held the book with a reverence that moved her deeply. He understood the significance of the gift. She was giving him a piece of her soul. He did not have words to thank her. Instead, he reached into a pouch at his belt and drew out a single, perfect arrowhead, chipped from a piece of obsidian so black it seemed to swallow the fatting light. It was razor-sharp, beautiful, and lethal. It was a tool, a weapon, a piece of his world. He placed it in her palm, folding her fingers over it. His hand enveloped hers, warm and strong. It was the only answer she needed. They stood there at the water's edge, the settler teacher and the crow chief, holding the symbols of each other's worlds in their hands, as the stars began to prick the violet sky above them. The divide between their peoples was vast, but in that moment, the space between their two hearts vanished completely. Their courtship was a quiet, secret thing, conducted in the stolen hours at the edges of the day. They met at dawn by the river, where he would teach her words in his language, Bakup for horse, Iachielia for sage, Bialuk for love. She would teach him to read English letters, tracing them in the damp sand with a stick, his large, calloused hand guiding hers. They met in the meadows at twilight, where he showed her how to track a deer, not to kill it, but to understand its story from the faint impressions in the earth. She, in turn, would read to him from her books, translating the stories of King Arthur's knights, explaining how their codes of honor and loyalty were not so different from his own. They were learning each other, not just the words, but the rhythms of their thoughts, the landscapes of their hearts. He discovered her fierce intelligence, her hidden stubbornness, her deep, abiding compassion that extended to every living thing. She discovered his dry, subtle humor, his incredible patience, his profound love for his people that was the very core of his being. The love that grew between them was not a sudden, dramatic fire, but a slow, deep burn, like the banked coals at the heart of a lodge fire, constant, enduring, and generating a warmth that could sustain a life. It was inevitable that their secret would be discovered. The valley was too small, their happiness too palpable to be hidden for long. It was Anya who first knew, seeing the new light in Elinar's eyes and the peaceful contentment that had settled over the often stern chief. She smiled and said nothing, her own heart full for her friend. The true test came from Iruha's people. Thathanka, still nursing his wounded pride and jealousy, saw the way his chief looked at the pale-faced teacher. He began to murmur again, his words poisonous. He is bewitched. She uses her magic on him just as the other one did on Maka. He thinks with his heart, not his head. He will lead us to ruin for this woman. The council of elders, respected men with lined faces and eyes that had seen many winters, came to Iruha. They spoke with respect, but their concern was clear. "My chief," one began, his voice raspy with age. "This path is covered with thorns. She is not of the people. Her ways are not our ways. Can a hawk mate with a wolf? It will bring only confusion to the band." Iruha listened patiently, his face a mask of calm. When they had finished, he stood. He did not speak with anger or defiance, but with a quiet, unshakable authority that came from the depth of his conviction. "You speak of her ways," he said, his voice low and carrying. "I have seen her ways. I have seen her sit with our sick children when fear kept others away. I have seen her respect for Cox, a respect that comes from the heart, not from politics. She does not seek to change us. She seeks to understand us. Her courage is not the courage of the war party. It is the courage of the heart, and it is a courage we need." He looked at each elder in turn. "You ask if a hawk can mate with a wolf. I say, look at Maka and Anya. Their love has made this valley stronger. It has given us a future. This love, my love, will do the same. I do not choose this path with my heart alone. I choose it with my spirit, and I believe it is a good path for our people." His words, spoken with such certainty and wisdom, silenced the opposition. The elders, who trusted his judgment above all else, nodded slowly. The matter was settled. Henry Cooper, too, had seen the change in Eleanor. He saw the new radiance in her, the happiness that made her even more beautiful. He called her to his porch one evening. "Eleanor," he said gently, his kind eyes searching hers, "there are rumors." Eleanor's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "They are not rumors, Henry." He sighed, not with disapproval, but with a fatherly concern. "It is a difficult path, my dear. The world, even our small world here, will not always be kind." "I know," she said, her voice soft but firm. "But Henry, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. He is a good man, the best man I have ever known." Henry looked at her, at the unwavering certainty in her eyes, and he saw the ghost of his own Sarah, the same fierce love and determination. He smiled, a sad, wise smile. "Then you have my blessing," he said, "and my protection for what it is worth." The wedding was not a single ceremony, but a blending of two. It was held in the meadow between the settlement and the village, a symbolic uniting of the two worlds. The first part was a traditional Apsaluk ceremony. Eleanor, dressed in a stunning white deerskin dress made for her by the women of the village and adorned with intricate beadwork of blue and yellow, the colors of the sky and the sun, stood beside Iruha, who wore his finest regalia, a shirt fringed with ermine tails, his hair braided with strips of otter fur. They exchanged vows of commitment not just to each other, but to the people, promising to be a bridge between their worlds. They were wrapped together in a single, beautifully painted buffalo robe, symbolizing their two lives becoming one. The second part was a simple settler service, officiated by Henry Cooper. They stood under an arch of woven willow branches and wildflowers as Henry spoke of love, commitment, and the building of a new family. They exchanged rings forged by Thomas Rivers from a single piece of silver, a metal unknown to the Apsaluk, symbolizing the new, unique bond they were creating. The entire valley attended. Settlers and Apsaluk sat together on the grass, sharing a feast that included roasted venison and fresh-baked bread, stewed berries and steamed corn. There was music from a harmonica and the steady, rhythmic beat of a hand drum. For one perfect, golden afternoon, the divide did not exist. There was only one people, celebrating a love that had dared to believe in a better world. Their first year of marriage was a time of deep, abiding joy. Eleanor moved into Iruha's spacious tipi, learning the rhythms of his life, the meanings of the paintings on the walls, the sacredness of the home fire. He, in turn, embraced her world, often sitting with her in the now-finished schoolhouse, helping her make signs that paired English words with Apsaluk pictures. Eleanor became the teacher she had always dreamed of being, but in a way she had never imagined. Her students were a lively, bright-eyed mix of settler children and Apsaluk children. They learned their ABCs alongside the names of the four directions. They learned to count using both beans and polished stones. They heard the story of David and Goliath and the story of the one who dreams the mountains. They were not being taught to choose one culture over the other. They were being taught that they were the heirs to both, that their world was twice as rich, twice as beautiful. It was the greatest work of her life. And then a new miracle began. The familiar nausea in the mornings, the sudden, profound fatigue, the subtle, blooming change in her body. Anya confirmed it with a smile and a tear. "You are with child, Eleanor." The news spread through the valley like a joyful wind. For Iruha, the mighty chief, the news rendered him speechless. He looked at Alinar, his strong, stoic face overcome with an emotion so raw and powerful it brought tears to the eyes of those who saw it. He placed a trembling hand on her still flat stomach, his eyes wide with awe. "A child," he whispered the word a prayer. "Our child." For the Apsaluk, the coming of a child, especially the child of their chief, was a sacred event. For the settlers, it was a symbol of the future, a testament to their survival and thriving. This child, more than any treaty or spoken agreement, was the true unification of the valley. Elinar's pregnancy was a time of tender care and deep preparation. The women of both communities surrounded her, offering advice, sewing tiny clothes of softest doeskin and woven cotton, sharing stories of their own births. Iruha was her constant, vigilant protector, his love for her manifesting in 1,000 small, thoughtful ways. A cup of tea when she was tired, a supporting arm on her walks, his deep voice reading to her at night, the words a soothing rumble against her ear as she rested her head on his chest. The birth itself was long and difficult. Alinar labored through a stormy night, the wind howling around the tipi like a pack of wolves. Anya and the Apsaluk midwife, Bakat's wife, worked together, a perfect team. Iruha waited outside, his face etched with a fear he had never known on any battlefield, packing like a caged animal as Alinar's cries were torn away by the wind. But as the first light of dawn broke, piercing the storm clouds with shafts of brilliant gold, a new sound filled the tipi. The strong, healthy cry of a newborn. It was a boy. Anya emerged, her face radiant with exhaustion and joy. She nodded to Iruha, who stumbled inside, his heart in his throat. Alinar lay on the furs, pale and exhausted, but her face was shining with a love so fierce and pure it stole his breath away. In her arms, swaddled in a soft rabbit fur blanket, was their son. He had a shock of dark hair and Alinar's piercing blue eyes. Iruha knelt beside them, his large hand trembling as he reached out to touch his son's tiny, perfect fist. The baby's fingers curled around his father's calloused finger, holding on with a surprising strength. Tears, rare and precious, welled in Iruha's eyes and traced paths down his cheeks. He looked from his son to his wife, his heart so full he thought it would break. "He is beautiful," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "He is ours," Alinar whispered back, her own tears falling. "A child of both worlds." They named him Bashi, which meant wisdom, and Samuel for Alinar's father. Bashi Samuel. His name was his first bridge. As the news spread, the entire valley came to pay homage. Settlers and Apsaluk alike filed quietly into the tipi to glimpse the future. They saw their chief, the rock of their people, gazing at his child with a look of utter devotion. They saw the teacher, their chronicler, radiant with maternal strength. And they saw the child, a perfect blend of both his parents, a living promise of the peace they had all fought for. That evening, as the setting sun painted the tipi walls with a warm, golden light, Alinar lay with her head on Iruha's shoulder, their son sleeping peacefully on his chest. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and new. "He will have your strength," Alinar murmured sleepily. "And your courage," Iruha replied, his lips brushing her forehead. "He will have your people's stories," she said. "And your people's books," he answered. They lay in silence then, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of their son, the sound of their future, the living, breathing embodiment of a love that had crossed every frontier to create something entirely new, and more beautiful than either of them could have ever dreamed alone. The greatest love story the valley would ever know was no longer just a story. It was their life. If you've enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing so that you don't miss any of our future videos. Moon Dragon, Under the Light of the Moon.